I sold my house for €1 to ruin the man who tried to steal our street. 3 months later, that same man, our city's most praised developer, begged me in a walnut-paneled conference room to name a price, while his glass tower bled money by the hour. I told him the price was a bench with a brass plaque bearing the name of the friend he'd buried under 40 years of paperwork in one collapsing bridge. That's not the start of the story. It's the lever in the middle. Let me start at the evening he sent boys to scare me and left with blue paint on his shoes like a brand. My name is Makola, 69, retired civil engineer. I lived, on a quiet block near the tram depot, a street of old poplars that rattle like rain when the wind comes from the river. We have a handful of pensioners, a seamstress, 2 families who argue over parking, and a corner shop where the bread is always square. Not picturesque, just ours. When Grail Construct bought the derelict match factory at the far end, they held a meeting with balloons, coffee, and a slideshow promising European living. Their CEO, a young man named Serhi in a scarf too thin for the season, smiled for photos. He said they would restore the facade, keep the chimney, plant trees, and donate a museum space for the heritage of work. He said words like sustainable and human scale. I asked about soil compaction and the tram line's vibration envelope. I asked about groundwater and the old drainage maps. Serhi hummed. He had a good hum, like a violin warming up. 2 months later, at 6 a.m, they cut down the poplars. A bulldozer took the corner of the seamstress's garden and the brick fence of the parking feud family. They ripped open the cobbles we'd mended ourselves. The men in helmets shrugged when we shouted. A pickup truck broadcast a recorded notice. Authorized works, apologies for inconvenience. I called City Hall. The woman at the hotline said the trees were diseased and the road required emergency access. I called the Department of Heritage Protection. A man there told me, off the record, that the chimney was already slated to become a glass elevator shaft. I am not a young man to stand in front of bulldozers, although that morning I tried. You can stand until the blade is 2 arms away. Then something in you calculates the width of your bones. The foreman smiled with the soft mouth of a man used to pushing without consequences. He told me about progress. He told me about compensation. He told me to go home. I did go home. I went to the back room where I keep my old tubes of drawings. Roadbeds, culverts, expansion joints. 40 years of calculations. I unrolled the maps of our street, the thin, crawling handwriting of a younger me, and I went hunting for the nail that holds a wall. Our street isn't straight. It curves around a silted branch of a canal that existed on paper in 1921. A peculiar curve. When I designed the resurfacing in 1998, we kept that kink because beneath it, running like a vein, was a cast-iron sewer laid in 1903 and reinforced by a legal servitude recorded in 1931. A right-of-way for access and maintenance extending 5 meters on either side of the pipe. The servitude map was filed in a black binder in the municipal archives and then forgotten by everyone except for me, because I'd had to measure it in winter with stiff fingers. Servitudes are like ghosts. People live above them as if nothing exists below, until the ghosts decide to rattle pots. Grail's rendering showed a driveway across that curve, a private drop-off beneath their future arch. It lay right across the servitude. The right-of-way, if enforced, would forbid permanent structures. Their foundation design would intersect my pipe's ghostly 5-meter comfort. I photocopied the 1931 map, the 1998 resurfacing plan, and the maintenance log for the sewer, last inspected 2007, overdue by a decade. Then I went to see Serhi. He gave me coffee that tasted like optimism and told me his lawyers had checked everything. I slid the maps across the table. He hummed. He called his project manager. The project manager smiled and said servitudes lapse when not used. I told him servitudes don't lapse, they sleep. He said it would be expensive to change the plan. He said our road was elastic. That word, elastic, made something old in me stiffen. I was on the team for the bridge at Rusinivka, I said, and watched him flicker. The one that collapsed during repair in '86. The rigging failed because someone treated the plan as elastic. There were 2 dead. He didn't know the names. Of course he didn't. Progress is built on unmarked graves, and not just in the way you think. He told me to take it up with the city. I did. I made an appointment I didn't get. I wrote letters that came back stamped with the thumbprints of the board. Meanwhile, Grail smoothed crushed stone over the last of the poplar stumps, and the corner shop closed because the utilities were intermittently cut by accident. That's when I sold my house for €1. The buyer was a company called Quiet Bend. Its mailing address was a rented desk above a pawn shop. Its director on paper was a man of 20 whose last known employment was repairing smartphones. He was my grandson, but that part didn't show up in any register. Why sell? Because I needed leverage. Grail would recognize, not a complaint, but a contract. Our street, like many, had been privatized in uneven bites during the Great Sell-Off. My deed included a narrow strip behind the fence, running along the curve like a belt, 2 meters wide, 30 meters long, useless to anyone except anyone who wanted a driveway. A driveway like Grail's. Quiet Bend bought my house and my useless strip. Quiet Bend then acquired, one by one, 6 other slivers. A meter of frontage from the seamstress. The path beside the parking feud family's shed. A rectangle behind the tram depot's wall that nobody had walked since 1973, but which was still technically part of a retired janitor's estate. Some old men sign anything for a bottle and a kind word, not in my neighborhood. We paid the janitor's daughter market price and then some because I believe in sleep. I could do my part, but I couldn't move a city alone. That's where my grandson came in. Bodan is 23, a thin boy with cable ties for fingers. He wears a hoodie even in August and speaks fluent bureaucracy. APIS, GIS, crawlers. He never finished university, but if you hand him a riddle, he will eat it. He set up Quiet Bend's shell as carefully as a clock. He scraped public procurement portals for Grail's contracts, watched their bids, followed the threads of their subcontractors through a tangle of identical consultancies registered in the same 2 streets. He also kissed a girl who works at the Heritage Department, which I will neither condemn nor encourage. But I note that, after they ate soup one night, the old file with the 1931 servitude map acquired a scan. Quiet Bend filed an easement of access for maintenance across our own strip, piggybacking on the 1931 Ghost. If Grail built their driveway, they would be building across our right to dig at any moment and at any hour so long as it was necessary and prudent. We offered a cooperation agreement. It was written in such a way that the only thing reasonable was to redesign. They didn't. Serhi's hum turned sharp. He hired new lawyers with hair that had never met wind. He told the newspapers about my obstruction. He told City Hall that we were sabotaging progress. He sent me a letter threatening to bill me for delays. He thought I was alone. He also sent boys. 3 of them, white sneakers, tired of being good. They came at night. They cracked the back door and moved tame like cats. They had gloves. They had a can of solvent and a jug of something clear in a backpack. They didn't know that old houses watch. My house watched through a camera I'd hidden inside a cuckoo clock casing. It watched the kitchen light up as they poured clear liquid in zigzags across the floor. It watched me step out and say, "My wife gave me that table." Although my wife has been dead 6 years, and the table's veneer is bubbled with tea. They froze, because men sent to threaten are not sent to meet grandfathers awake. You can tell someone willing to hit from someone who was told he won't have to. Their eyes went wet. I raised my hands and warned them about the blue on their shoes. They looked down. The camera would have recorded their confusion even if I hadn't. The blue wasn't there by accident. A week before, I'd rigged a sprinkler pipe in the rafters with a small tank of a harmless marking dye used in river surveys. When liquid splashed in the kitchen in a pattern that fit fire, the heat bead sensor I'd taped under the shelf triggered the release. A fine mist fell. It stained. Not the entire shoe, not dramatic, just the seam and the soles and the edges where fabric meets rubber. A luminous ring that would take weeks to wear off. I had also swapped the bottle in their backpack with distilled water from the same brand. I cannot say who provided me the backpack 10 minutes before they arrived. The city has more eyes than you think. They ran. They told a story somewhere of a crazy grandfather and a cuckoo clock that spits. The foreman's SUV had a faint blue fingerprint on its handle the next morning. For the record, I never wanted them hurt. I wanted them warned that work might select a different master. A week later, the drilling rig hit something at the edge of the match factory. Something hollow. The operator called it a bad sound, like biting a stone. They pulled up a fragment of brick formed in a vaulted curve. The rumor spread by lunchtime. A tunnel. The old city is full of them. Storm drains, forgotten basements, the arteries of vanished industries. This one might have been part of a vaulted stormway from the 1880s that, if proven, could trigger a heritage review so thorough that no one would break ground for a year. I didn't plant the tunnel. I am not a magician. But I did file a citizen's request for a preliminary assessment of potential substructures under the 1931 servitude line, with a bibliography of old insurance atlases and a list of surnames connected to the match factory's founding. I signed it in my little, stubborn hand. I CC'd the woman who eats soup with my grandson and the journalist who writes about corruption without flinching. I sent a second copy to City Hall's new Office of Openness, a unit created to put a bright sticker on old habits. Work slowed. Reports were requested. The crane paused with its arm hanging like a question. Grail pivoted to pressure. They offered my neighbors gifts. They offered me money. They offered me a place in their museum of work, a wall with my name, an exhibit about the bridge, a plaque. I said no. I didn't want my name on a wall they could dust when the budget allowed. I wanted the wall outside to remain ours, and it didn't fit into their concept visuals. Then Baudin found the number I had been waiting to see since he ran his first script. Grail was not a tower. It was a ladder leaning on other ladders. Their main borrowing, a line of credit bridged by a syndicate of 3 banks, had a covenant requiring progress milestones. Remove trees, pour foundation, seal basement, reach 3rd floor. Behind that sat a cheaper, nastier tranche from a firm that bought packages of risky municipal bonds and turned them into obligations for people who liked their interest extra seasoned. That tranche was secured with a pledge on the match factory parcel and a personal guarantee from Serhi's holding company. The covenant's fine print relied on a schedule. Schedules depend on permits, which depend on inspectors, which depend on whether it is a Tuesday and whether your best friend's cousin got married last week. The difference between we have a problem and we have a default is calendar days. Quiet Ben filed injunctions to contest a curb cut. We asked for the repair of the sewer. We demanded access 12 mornings in a row. We were very reasonable and always polite. We never said no, we just said, after the inspection, and, according to the servitude, and the Heritage Department's preliminary memo. Every hour we bought was an hour that Serhi's loan aged like milk. He called me to a meeting. Walnut paneling, bottled water, a floor so glossy it held men upside down like secrets. "My cola," he said, and he'd practiced the intimacy. "Your house is worth money. You say you love the street. We can give you a new apartment with a lift, no drafts, a view. We can pave the road better than it's ever been paved." "It's the wrong road," I said. "It's the wrong shape." He touched the servitude map on the table like it might move under his finger. "These technicalities," he said. "We're losing millions." "I lost a man," I said, and watched him think I meant a son. In '86. Rusinivka, the collapse. We did 3 days and nights in mud. We said the names of each part as we lowered it into the water, as if correcting a mistake in a prayer book. I remember the sound when the north truss wavered. I remember a smell like burnt rain. Progress is not an apology. I stood to leave. He sighed the way men sigh when they believe you don't understand economy. He told me that construction was war. You win or you die. He cupped his hand over his bottled water like he owned the molecules in it. Then he said something that pared chew to bone. You are in the way of the living. It's a good line. It is also the sort of line a man says before he pays someone to repeat it with steel. That night, a car idled at the end of my street without lights. Two silhouettes got out and lit cigarettes. Smoke rose and vanished. Then a different car arrived and parked across my gate so close that its bumper kissed the iron. A stack of new bricks appeared against my neighbor's wall the next day. They had a sticker on them with the logo of a subcontractor I'd been following through its 3 address changes. This is how modern intimidation works. The hand is always gloved with paperwork. I wired my kitchen for sound. I sent the video of the boys with the blue shoes to a friend in the district police who hates the idea of sons doing dirty work. I visited the seamstress with a cake and left with a signature empowering me to act on her behalf. I dialed 2 numbers I had sworn never to call. One was a pensioner named Roman who played chess in the park and whose son co-owned a debt purchasing company. I don't like those companies. They feed on other people's wrong rulings. But when misfiled debts from old municipal houses go to auction, the companies that buy them can sometimes be persuaded to look at the debt that smells like a man you want your grandchildren to walk around. Roman, I said over the chessboard as he moved his bishop, tell your boy to watch for a pledge about to be renegotiated. Whose? Grail. The match factory. There will be a smell. Where? Everywhere money went and came back. What do I get? A bench with your name on it, I said, and Roman smiled like an old thief recognizing another old thief who only steals air. The second number I called belonged to a woman named Alina, a lawyer who writes her submissions like notes to a stubborn child and has a memory for bylaws like a safe. Alina doesn't work cheap. She also doesn't miss. We filed our own suit, not to stop construction, but to enforce the 1931 servitude, to compel regular inspections of the 1903 sewer, to require hazard plans for any heritage substructures, and to set strict windows for cooperation. You cannot be accused of obstruction if you ask a court to make you cooperative. Alina requested an interim measure. No heavy equipment within 5 meters of the curve until the court ruled. The judge granted it with a shrug, like a man covering himself against rain. Grail brought in geophysicists to prove no tunnel existed. The censors found voids anyway, because cities are bread loaves full of air pockets. The head of the Heritage Department, after eating soup with my grandson for the 3rd time, issued a formal notice. Preliminary protection. The crane went still like a stork. At the same time, Roman's son emailed Bodan a PDF without comment. Auction notice. Distressed obligation. Developer pledge. It was Grail's mezzanine tranche, the nasty one, with repayment accelerated due to uncertainty of permitting environment. It was being sold at a discount to eligible participants. Quiet Bend, thanks to a peculiar clause in the law and the purchase of a ludicrously cheap municipal bond last year, was an eligible participant. Bodan sat at my table, his tea going cold. If we buy this, he said slowly, we are owed their kneecaps. Not kneecaps, I told him. Just a chair at the table and a pen. We bid. We won because no one else wanted a piece of a fight in mud. We now held a paper that said we could, if covenants breached, ask the court for a thing people don't believe exists in real life. An injunction that would hand us control of the asset to protect its value. It wouldn't be permanent. It would be messy. It would, however, be hot enough to burn anyone who tried to hold it without gloves. I slept for 3 hours that night. When I woke, I heard a new sound, drilling too close. The foreman's men had moved the rig 5 meters, or maybe they argued that their tape measure was a different brand. The rig shuddered. I heard the change of pitch a drill makes when it bites something it shouldn't. I heard a crack. Then my floor rose under me and the kitchen smelled, for the first time in my life there, exactly like the bridge in '86. Wet iron, sour rot, and old silt. The 1903 pipe, insulted beyond patience, broke. A gout of water and things I will not describe because I respect you rushed into the open trench. The men jumped back. Someone shouted. Someone slipped. The dye I'd used, waiting like a small joke in the sprinkler lines, had bled into the leak through the floorboards I'd never gotten around to replacing because my wife liked the way they sounded. The mess glowed faintly lovely for a while, a ghost river running green-blue along the gutter and into Grail's prepared foundation pit. The scene froze like a painting, and then every camera within 10 blocks had something to love. The city arrived with blue lights. The utility company came with clipboards and the kind of anger men reserve for threats to their favorite tools. The heritage department arrived because any wet hole in the ground is a heritage hazard until proven otherwise. Reporters arrived because the rumor machine is 1,000 times faster than any fiber optic cable. Alina arrived with her injunction request already printed on paper with edges like blades. Serhiy arrived too, without his scarf. He looked smaller. His hum had gone somewhere else to sing. "You did this," he said, and there was something like awe in his voice. Not for me. For the fact that a little old man had turned his site into a theater. I shook my head. "You did. You and those who decided the plan was elastic. The court, that afternoon, gave us temporary control to preserve the asset, because the asset, submerged in glowing sewage, required preservation. We didn't rush to use it. We used the right it gave us to freeze all work until a remediation plan was done and paid for. Our plan included replacing the whole length of the 1903 pipe, documenting the tunnel, and rerouting the driveway away from the curve in compliance with both the 1931 servitude and the preliminary heritage protection. It wasn't a demand. It was an invitation to do the right thing slowly and painfully. Grail's banks panicked. Defaults adore panic. Their cheaper loan tripped. The mezzanine tranche we held began to heat up. The city, which had smiled at Serhiy, frowned. The mayor's aide called me and said words about cooperation I'll spare you. The foreman went missing for 3 days. The boys with the blue shoes turned up in the district station with a different kind of wet look in their eyes, and then they turned up in a courtroom as witnesses. By the end of the week we could smell winter in the morning. Bodan set up a live stream that showed the pit filling with clean water from the emergency pumps and then emptying like a lung. People watched with the attention usually reserved for football. It wasn't just the theater. It was the hope that a little insistence could puncture a big swindle. Somewhere in all that mud, the first twist of the knife happened. A man sent my grandson a message from an email address that looked like a name and a number. He claimed he worked for Grail. He claimed he'd been asked to rig the electrical meters in the temporary site housing. He claimed they were siphoning power from the tram line to avoid paying during unexpected delays. He sent a grainy phone photo of a junction box under a tarp with a neat new junction that looked like a spider borrowing a leg. I stared at it with an old man's jealousy. Such neat tape, such perfect screws. We didn't run to the police. We called a friend in the transport company. No friend is a pure friend, but a man who loves trams is usually trustworthy where trams are concerned. He sent a crew at night with a van that pretends to be a van. They lifted the tarp and sighed. They cut the spider leg. On the morning news, the tram company announced that due to unlawful interference with municipal infrastructure, a complaint had been filed. Grail's spokesperson called it a misunderstanding. Serhiy's hum was nowhere to be heard. "Do you see? We didn't crush them in one blow. We removed small bones. We let them trip. We made sure the cameras saw them trip. Each wound bled into the next injury's mouth. Then the old thing I had kept close roared out of the archive and showed its teeth." In '86, after the collapse, after the funerals, After the long, shrugging parade of men explaining that nobody could have predicted it and everybody did their best, there was an internal report. It was 6 pages long. It was written by 3 engineers and a man who drank too much, and it said the rigging was not properly inspected, and the welding plan had been altered by a signature that could be read 2 ways. The signature belonged to a young site lead whose name I will not write, because it was on every tongue in our office for years outside of the hearing of managers. The young site lead later moved into project management, and then into development, and then into a holding company with a different name, and then into a board that financed a startup called Grail Construct. Serhi was a scarf on a mannequin. The man who had altered the welding plan was one of his 3 invisible owners. How did I know? Because I keep letters like family. Because men in my profession keep prophecy in old envelopes. Because a friend of mine, when he died, left me a notebook with a list of names and a margin note that said, in a spidery hand, "Do not forget." I had forgotten. I had remembered as a habit, not as a mission. The servitude, the pipe, the tunnel, they had been mine. This suddenly was personal in a way I had not known how to take personally. I asked Alina if we could use it. She said the statute of limitations was a graveyard you can't dig in. But the crowd of facts, she said, is a chorus. Sometimes even a dead voice can sing with the living. We added the internal report, with its signatures, as an appendix to a public comment on Grail's Museum of Work draft plan. In the comment, I wrote in a calm hand that the company proposing to enshrine heritage had in its ownership a man who had prematurely enshrined 2 workers in 1986 and then enshrined their file in a drawer. We asked, do such men deserve to write the captions of our city? The journalists who don't flinch called me for the names. I didn't give them. I gave them enough that they could find without me drawing a map. 2 days later, one of them did find, and printed, and the man who altered the welding plan filed a defamation suit and then withdrew it 3 hours later, and then resigned from Grail's board for health reasons. Within a week, Serhi called the walnut-paneled meeting. He didn't begin with coffee. He began with sweat. He told us the banks wanted to renegotiate. He told us the city wanted compliance with our remediation plan. He told me I was stubborn. Yes, fine, but that stubbornness had a price. He asked me to name it. Name the price, he said. A bench, I said. He blinked. A bench. A bench with a plaque. You will build the green pocket we designed, here at the curve. You will reroute the driveway. You will pay for the new pipe. You will open your museum, if you still want it, with a corner for those who worked without plaques. And you will put a bench at the curve. My wife liked to sit here and listen to the trams, with a plaque with a name. The name is Petro Primachenko. Who is that? He asked. The man under the bridge, I said. Serhi looked at his lawyer. The lawyer pinched his nose as if smelling old silt. We cannot dedicate public space. You can, Alina said, under the temporary control we currently hold, as part of a remediation plan incorporating community benefit under Section 54 of the We'll do the bench, Serhi said, swallowing whole statutes. Fine. We'll do the bench. But that isn't the price, I said. His face did a small private thing, as if I'd tapped a tooth he believed capped. There is more. You will transfer 10% of your project profit, if there is profit, to a fund for workmen's safety training. You will commit in writing to hiring from our neighborhood first for non-specialized jobs. And you will sell Quiet Ben the ground floor corner unit of the retail space at the curve at cost. For what? He managed. For a bakery, I said. For bread that is not square. He stared at me like I was a mad king trading horses for songs. The lawyer wrote with a pen that would someday be described as expensive at auction. He agreed. He had to. The site was a theater, and his investors had no appetite for new shows. He signed that day the way men sign who think they can still wriggle out by night. Alina recorded everything. Bodan smiled without showing teeth. The seamstress cried because in the plans I slid across the table, drafted by my old hand on clean paper, her garden's fence had a gate in it again. I would like to tell you this is where the credits rolled. But there was one more twist. An unnecessary twist. Except that pride rarely knows when to go home. In the night, someone lit a fire at the far corner of the site. Nothing big. Pallets and paper. A signal flare of stupidity. The firefighters came quiet and precise. They put a foam blanket over the corner and made small talk about the weather. Next morning, a spokesperson said the fire was minor. The foreman said someone wanted to make a point. The point was made to me, though, in a worse way. On my kitchen wall, under the cuckoo clock, someone had scrawled a sentence in marker while I was at the walnut table. It read, "The living will step over you." Clean calligraphy. A hand that learned to write in a good school. I made tea. I looked at the sentence until the afternoon turned and laid a bright line across it like a razor. Then I unscrewed the clock, lifted it, and pulled out the micro SD card. The camera had watched the man step into my kitchen. He was careful. He wore gloves. He moved like someone who'd practiced moving in other people's rooms. He wrote without looking up, as if the words were his friends. He left. We watched the video 3 times. The first time, we said some simple words. The second time, Bodan leaned forward and paused at a frame where the man's sleeve lifted and showed a network of birthmarks like the layout of a small town. The third time, I knew his name. He wasn't Serhi's man. He was a city councilman whose last-minute swing of a vote had made the difference for Grail's emergency works approval. He had, it turned out, stepped over a lot. We didn't take the video to the police. We took it to the journalist who doesn't flinch, and to the head of the tram company, who had a habit of frowning when photographs of junction boxes cross his desk. The story that came out didn't name the man. It described the birthmarks. The man posted a photo the following week of himself in a short-sleeved shirt at a charity run, not realizing his sleeves had betrayed him. The charity refused his donation. He resigned to spend more time with his family. His family, I hear, has a dacha and a hole in the wall where a picture used to hang. Winter came early and hard. The site went still for a month with a useful stillness. A stillness in which I could hear water under the street breathing around the new pipe we installed. The tunnel was mapped. It turned out not to be grand, just a vaulted drain that led nowhere special. But it was ours, and we marked it on the new plan with a dotted line like a scar. In February, with breath like smoke, they poured the new foundation with the curve respected, the driveway rerouted down the far side, the poplar stumps replaced by young linden trees in baskets of mesh to protect them from whoever carries a saw in his soul. The bench appeared on a morning blue with cold. It is simple. Wood, metal, no flourish. The plaque reads, "In memory of Petro Primachenko, worker, friend, 1947 to 1986. We sit because you stood." I sat on it alone first, then with Bodan, then with the seamstress and her granddaughter, then with Roman who won his chess game that day, then with Alina who smiled like someone who bought herself a pair of shoes after a long winter. Serhi came to the opening in a thicker scarf. He said things about partnership. He hummed a little, weak in the throat. He shook my hand and said we both loved the city. I told him people say that about dangerous women too. He laughed because men like him love being called dangerous until the day they learn the word has an edge facing both ways. Quiet Ben took the corner unit at cost and turned it into a bakery. We hired the boy who took the blue dye home on his shoes to knead dough. He apologized without saying the word apology. Every morning shelves fill with loaves that are not square. The city smells briefly like what you wish a city smelled like. I moved back into my house, which I rented from Quiet Ben for a price that would make my younger self whistle and my older self nod. We fixed the floor. We left, under the new boards, a sliver of the old wood where my wife spilled tea. The cuckoo clock still coughs twice at midnight because a screw somewhere is bent. I won't fix it. A man needs one small, friendly distress to keep him honest. I sometimes see Serhi outside the bakery buying a bun and reading messages with that trained frown people use to look important. He lifts his eyes and we exchange a nod. We will never be friends. But he is living in a city where a few old maps and a pair of blue shoes mattered. That is enough. Last week, late, after the tram stopped rattling the glass, a woman came to sit beside me on the bench. She had a folder on her lap with the city's crest. "You wrote the letter about the museum captions," she said without looking at me. "I recognized your handwriting from the old resurfacing plan." I handled the filing. "I wrote a lot of letters," I said. "You wrote them as if people would read." I didn't answer. She touched the plaque with a knuckle. "My father was there that day," she said. "The bridge." He wasn't hurt. He came home and never worked near a rope again. He never sat on a bench again either. He said benches made a man an audience for trains. "What do you do at the city?" I asked. "I'm moving to maintenance," she said. "I want to touch things that stay in one place." We sat in the cold until our breath made a small fog. Then she stood and left. I watched her as she walked along the curve, a particular curve that exists because men once believed in straight lines and then learned to love a kink for the way it saves pipes and benches and bread and names. This is the part where I tell you what revenge feels like when you have arthritis. It does not feel like fireworks. It feels like holding a warm cup in the morning and hearing your street intact. It feels like not stepping over anyone who is still living. It feels like saying a dead man's name out loud and nobody shushing you because the room has donors. A week after the bakery opened, a boy, maybe 12, stuck a piece of gum to the plaque. The seamstress saw him and made a noise that could cut silk. I stood, reached into my pocket, took out the small bottle of unscented oil I carry for squeaky doors and grandfather hands, and softened the gum until it uncurled from Petro's name like a mistake admitting itself. I wiped the plaque with the handkerchief I use when I am trying not to cry. The boy stood and watched, shoulders tucked, waiting for scorn. "What is his name?" I asked him. He sounded it out. He said it wrong, then right. "Do you know why we sit here?" I asked. "To watch the trams," he said. "Also that," I said. He kicked at a leaf. "They said you made that big building man cry." "We made him right," I said. "Which is rarer." He considered that. Then he ran off toward the tram depot to do something he would lie about later. I went back to the bench. The plaque shone. The bakery door chimed. The linden saplings had thin trunks and high hopes. Under the street the pipe ran true. The tunnel lay mapped like a secret told in confidence. The driveway curved away from the ghost line as if it had always obeyed it. None of this is a miracle. All of it is work. Do I feel sorry for Serhi? I do. It is a curse to be good at humming and not know the tune. He will build again. He will plant trees in some other neighborhood and then cut them, promising replacements in a firm voice. Maybe he will remember the way this street felt under his bad shoes. Maybe he will hire a man who loves maps and listen when the man says, "There's a pipe here, and under the pipe, there is a tunnel, and above the tunnel, there will be a bench someday. And if you place your driveway over all that, you'll end up sitting in court with a grandfather, and he will sell his house for €1 and buy your knees with paper." It is late. My hand aches when the weather turns. I blow warm air on my knuckles. I listen to the tram. I look at the bench. The word revenge has a taste like copper. The word justice, when pronounced by people in suits, is airy, like bread without salt. I don't chase either of those words. I sit. I say in a voice only the linden hears, "Petro, you would not have liked the museum, but you would like this bench. The view is better at this curve, The poplars are gone. In their place there are young trees that will take decades to grow. I will not see them tall, but I designed the gutters to give them every possible chance. I put a tiny bend in the curbstones so that in a hard rain, water clings to the corner, slows, slides toward their roots. It's not visible. It's just there, like a servitude, like an old report, like a grandson's script, like the blue seam on a pair of shoes no one wanted to stain. You asked for a story. You expected flames, perhaps. Instead, I give you a bench and a pipe and a curve and a loaf of bread that is no longer square. If you need a twist, here it is. The twist is that the ending is quiet, and it is exactly what I wanted.
This is my grandfather's story. He lived it, I just share it. Subscribe for more true stories worth remembering.